because hearing myself usually gets confusing. Awesome. And we're live. So, straight from Amsterdam, Boston, and Atlanta, this is Terraform Thursday with new and old guests. I'm your host, Kareem Satirli, and I'm joined today by Omar Kawaya and Dave Cohen of Tutorial Linux fame. Hello. Sorry. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to say that. My bad. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. Before we start, quick reminder, this is a HashiCorp community event, which means we have a couple of guidelines. You can treat them as rules or just general inspiration to be a better human. If you have questions or comments during the session, we'd love for you to interact with us in the chat. That's going to be on your right side, which is probably on my left. This is really hard. And as you do so, just keep our community guidelines in mind. Be welcoming, inclusive, respectful. If you've been here, you've seen these rules, and you can review the full code of conduct on our website, but it's really important that we all do our best to make this a good experience for everyone, which also obviously makes it a cool experience. I mean, check with the 1990s, that's definitely the case. And with that, let's get started. Happy Canada Day if you're joining us from Canada. My name is Kareem Satirli. I'm a developer advocate at HashiCorp, where I focus on the infrastructure line of products. And I'm joined today by two fine folks from the Practitioner Experience Engineering team. I love that name. Let's talk about that for a second. Well, actually, let's do introductions first and then talk about the team name, because that is a mouthful, but I feel that there's a story to that. Dave, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm the resident noob of the team. Until recently, I was an SRE on the Terraform Cloud team, and I just switched over to the PXE team. And I think Omar is probably the best person, since he's one of the OG team members, to give an introduction.
Hey everyone, my name is Omar Kawaya. I'm a senior engineer and implementation lead on the Practitioner Experience Engineering team, aka PXE. Been at HashiCorp for a little over 3 years. Started off in product education engineering, but here I am. Been with this team for about 1.5 years now.
Yeah, it's cool. Coming, if it's okay, I'd love to talk about like my impressions of the team and like how it came about, because you kind of asked about that. It's this is like, I think, one of the most exciting things happening at HashiCorp, because it's filling such a need that we even internally have had, or externally before I was at HashiCorp. The team fills this kind of need for, well, the practitioner, like the operators and adopters of the software, which were to some degree kind of out in the cold, out on their own, left to kind of figure things out. And this team is all about like filling that gap. The fact that we've grown so tremendously just like recently shows that HashiCorp's really investing in this. So it's exciting to be here.
I think as a practitioner, as a former practitioner, current practitioner, I like when a company that makes the tools actually has, implementations of those tools that I can use without having to figure everything out. For some of our stuff, very easy, right? Getting started with Terraform, even if you just start up with a Docker provider, easy enough. Setting up a secure Vault installation that spans multiple regions, maybe even multiple clouds, there's a little bit more involved with that. Especially,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, and I was just gonna say that our tools are, and you talked about our team name change earlier, so we'll get to that as well, because I know you were gonna ask a question there, but I just want to say, like, our tools are very flexible, and you can set them up. You can set them up in a lot of ways, but over time, we've seen more and more people ask for, a little bit more of an opinionated approach to setting up our products. And what we're trying to do here, and I guess this is what we'll get into this now, Kareem, because you brought up the team name change. We used to be called Product Delivery, and that we wanted to expand our team name to encompass more of what we're doing, which is honestly just providing a pragmatic and beautiful experience to our practitioners when it comes to setting up our products. Beauty works better is one of our HashiCorp principles. So we want to make sure that when someone comes to our products and wants to set it up, that they do it in a way that is easiest, just makes sense and works. So that's why we sort of have this team name, or we've rebranded ourselves Team Practitioner Experience, because we're not just delivering products and like reducing barriers to adoption, but we are actually delivering a product. We are providing you with any accompanying tools to give you the best experience when running our products. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited to have Dave here too, because a lot of people will start off with our products, like they can go to learn.hashicorp.com and learn about our products. They can run, let's say, Vault like in dev mode, but then they want to take it to the next level and spin up a cluster in AWS. And I'm excited about being able to work on things that allow you to do that, but also do it in sort of a HashiCorp approved way. And when I say that, and Dave probably has a lot of enthusiasm here too, because a lot of what we're doing is based on like reference architecture and deployment guides, which we've currently taken into our scope. So we're working on that and improving those as well. So that's one of the things that I'm excited about here, like being able to deliver a module and just deliver like this practitioner experience that sort of aligns with what we advocate as, you know, architecture and how you should be deploying things. So I just wanted to kind of set that backdrop for what we do as a team.
If I can add on to that for just a sec, it's if you're out there and you're a practitioner like we all were or are, it's like everyone that I've talked to and myself when I was out there, you know, you have this feeling of like HashiCorp has this, they have these amazing tools, you want to use them. And there's this on-ramp that kind of starts very gradually with some of the learn stuff and some of the, you know, some of the documentation and guides that we have. And at some point, it just sort of drops you into the pool, into the deep end by yourself. And you're like, okay, how do I like do this for real on a large cloud provider to like give my boss an example, you know, to work from. And there's very little about, you know, people are often left to implement this stuff without even knowing what best practices are because they haven't read every single piece of documentation about the product. So I think one of the most exciting things about this is that the stuff we produce is going to, like Omar was saying, is going to be opinionated enough and informed enough to make a lot of the decisions for you correctly that you don't even know you need to make yet. And that doesn't mean that the tools can't, you know, stay flexible or that you can't change anything, but that was one of these gaps on the on-ramp that everyone, including me, seemed to kind of fall into, is like you end up having to decide something, you don't know why, you just implement it some way, that stuff goes into production. And then as you learn more, you're like, oh, we got to change this thing, we got to pull the rug out from under this, you know, reasonably productionized system and make config changes. So that's something I'm really excited about, is that future generations of HashiCorp tool operators are not going to face the same kind of pain points that we did.
I think it's a super good call out, especially because you could be using Vault for years, you know, essentially just the front end. You get your Terraform set up to pull in credentials, never have to worry about how it's actually working on the backend side of things. And then all of a sudden your colleague leaves and this is your job now, and you're like, well, I guess I can do it because, you know, I've used Vault, but it's such a different beast. Which actually brings me to my next question. I think you two have been working on a module around that. I want to talk about that.
Let's talk about it.
So first of all, what is the module going to do? Is it a Terraform module?
Yes, so it is a Terraform module for spinning up Vault Enterprise. And this is going to be a Terraform module that spins up Vault Enterprise according to our deployment guide and reference architecture. So by default, you'll have Vault spin up in high availability. So like if you're spinning it up in AWS, GCP, or Azure, it'll be split across availability zones. So we're going to be following a lot of those principles to make sure that things are reliable and secure. In this module, we're even taking care of details like TLS and TLS on the vault nodes themselves, so that everything's just secure end to end. And we're taking care of a lot of those things that normally is left as an exercise to the reader to do. We felt it was important to be able to at least get that aspect up and running for the user, and then they can manage it however they want after. And Dave mentioned something earlier about defaulting, touching on like defaulting things for users, making it as easy as possible. One of the things that I want to call out with the module that we're doing is we want this to be as easy as possible for the user. So there's a lot of things that we default, but we also leave them configurable so that if you're new to Vault and you just want it to work with minimum input, that'll work for you. And as you become more experienced and there's things that you want to change about it, there's a lot of knobs and wheels that you can turn yourself as you want to start changing things about it. So that's sort of our philosophy, like default whatever we can possibly default, but leave it configurable. So as the user gains more experience and wants to change some things, they're absolutely free to do that. So hopefully with this Terraform module, we're providing a beautiful experience. We're following reference architecture deployment guides, but we're also making it as easy as possible for you to spin it up so that we're not, sometimes you come across a Terraform module where it's like, hey, this is awesome. This does what I want it to do, but then you're inundated with like 50 required inputs. And you're like, sometimes that itself is a barrier, So we're trying to make this as a beautiful experience as possible there. So just wanted to call that out there.
I think that's a really important aspect of the whole experience. I mean, obviously experience is in your name, but we were talking about this a couple weeks ago with a colleague, and he summarized it. It's building Terraform modules is like being a supermarket. You can go there, you can download the module, which think of it as a ready-made meal, and you can just use it. But if you want to change a few things, like add a few more spices or availability zones, totally works. But on its own, it stands and it works. And I, for one, like when other people figure out the hard stuff, like TLS on all the nodes. Sorry, let me rephrase. TLS on all the nodes that works, which is possibly more important. Yeah, it can be an involved task to build.
I just want to give a huge shout out to Omar and the team. Like that's not the only like gnarly problem that they've solved. There's a lot of really tough kind of decisions and problems and things that I think people normally shy away from when they're creating modules, and they're just like, oh, we'll let the user like deal with that. But in the name of making this stuff easy to adopt and easy to use and still flexible once you start using it, it's a huge amount of work to get that right. And Omar and the team have done an incredible job with that. And I think when people start using this, they'll see that it really fills that gap. Like the biggest pain point that I think we had before with a lot of the tools was this, just kind of feeling dumped into the deep part of the water and left to kind of swim and figure it out. It's like, it's just huge. We've needed it for so many years.
That does deserve an applause. You mentioned that it's built around reference architecture, which I think is a hugely important way of building this, especially for practitioners, because we, as a company, obviously we built the tools, we know how to operate them, we have hosted products for you if you want to go that route. If you need to be on premise, the modules are coming your way. We're not gonna talk about timelines right now because you should be enjoying your summer right now. It's more important. But I think I'm curious, how do you establish what should be the reference architecture? and how do you implement that?
I think one of the ingredients for that, I don't have all the answers, but I think one of the things that kind of core to this team's philosophy is to get engineers that have practical experience with the tools at different scales, and to be open to user feedback, from the outside. It's like, it is about the user, and, we're not sitting in some ivory tower making up an architecture that looks nice and then trying to like impose that. What we do is based on years of experience using the tools in like real production applications, and having that experience inside the team. We have people from all the major clouds, and so there's that expertise of not just product expertise, but also product kind of cloud fit and all the different permutations of that. I think that's one of the core things that you have to do, right? If you have a team that's going to have opinions, all the engineers on that team should have some opinions based on really using the tools, because that's the only way to kind of match what users are experiencing and what they want. So that's I think that's the key, is like obviously knowing the tools really well, having experience with them, and also, just by virtue of working at HashiCorp, we have access to the product teams. So if there's anything that's unclear in the documentation or in the code or something, we can just, Slack a product engineer and ask a question like, hey, what is the best way to do this? Or for this use case, is what we have planned here, like, does that make sense? Or why is the like threshold for latency between data centers for Raft 8 milliseconds? Like these things that you find, you actually have a way of figuring them out and figuring out a right answer, or a right answer for most people. So it's all of that.
And I love the last part that you say, Dave, because it's definitely expertise on the team that we have here with all of our team members. But a big part of it's also just like communication and collaboration with other teams to, check our own assumptions and build something better. So I love that we have that going with our team, where we have the expertise, and one of our like core pillars in the team is just communication and collaboration as well. So
the thing I like about this is that because we are able to collaborate internally on this and bring in all these experiences, I as a practitioner don't have to wade through that, mud park and figure out like what is the right knob to set to this value. Because realistically, while it's cool to learn about Raft, it's probably not something you generally have time for. And figuring out why the header has to be set in that very specific way, or how to do the load balancer with your vault setup without exposing data. Yeah, I prefer when other people figure this out for me. It's almost an unfair advantage because you sit so close to other people. But so you mentioned it's going to be a Vault Enterprise module. Is the module going to be open sourced? Is it just for our enterprise customers?
This module will be open source. So anyone can use it. And then of course there's licensing things that will be taken care of with the module as well, provided that you have your license and all that. But yeah, it'll be open source and everybody should be able to use it.
Which means everyone can learn from it no matter what license they have.
Yeah.
I can probably pick up, even if it's built for Cloud One right now, let's say it's AWS specific, eventually I'll be able to get the architecture from that and apply it to my cloud, even if that's one that we don't necessarily support outright.
Yeah. I think the fact that we are doing this for like 3 major clouds right now, AWS, GCP, and Azure, there's plenty to learn from just those 3 different clouds, that if you want to look through it and get some experience running those, you should be able to take away a lot of what you learned there and apply it to your own situation if you need to.
And for what it's worth, oh, sorry.
I was going to say 3 major clouds up first. What if I, as a user, want to help contribute to that once the module is live? What if I want, an implementation for DigitalOcean, for example?
Good question. That's one of those territories where I feel like that's awesome, but I also don't know right now what's on the roadmap for what we would like support and give a lot of guidance for. So it's one of those things I'd have to check back with the team and see like where our mind is at as far as like the rest of the clouds and what we would welcome as like contributions there.
And it's not that we're not enthusiastic about the idea. It's just that everything we write and own, we're going to have to maintain, and we're not a huge team. So don't take our reticence to immediately commit to it as lack of enthusiasm. Yeah. And the other thing is, for anything specific, so like, three modules for 3 different clouds should give you a lot of insight into how, if you're on a 4th cloud, into exactly how the reference architecture maps to specific implementations. Like, what does it mean that we say all traffic should be encrypted? Well, it means MTLS everywhere. It means certs on the load balancer, certs on the instances. So those types of details where the reference architecture, I think that we're working on is extremely clear and like well explained, but anything that's like, I think this fills that gap of like, it shows you multiple very practical real life implementations that are one Terraform apply away from like existing in your demo environment that kind of show how to translate that reference, that higher level reference architecture into real life. So regardless of what cloud you're on, that should be helpful enough to get you started by just like forking and experimenting.
That sounds like good material for a couple of hackathons. Get together with your team. Each one picks a different cloud, and you figure out, like, hey, what's the way this works, and how does it work, and everything. I like it. In the meantime, if you're joining us in the chat, feel free to ask questions. We've had a lot of good feedback. Shantanu made a call out to the Terraform docs. They have definitely grown over time, and I'm enjoying the amount of stuff I can find easily now. But yeah, with tools like Terraform, my experience is, you pick a random resource and hey, there's 60 to 80 attributes. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted. But it's good stuff.
I think once people learn, there's just like some practice you need with reading Terraform docs, because you will get an appropriate provider for almost anything that you like Google with Terraform and whatever like resource in a cloud you're working with, or not even in a cloud. But yeah, just like having a firm grounding in Terraform and what where that attributes list is, you can just scroll past all the stuff. When you're like deep in the code, go to the bottom, look at the attributes. There's whatever you're trying to get to is there.
Yeah, actually, when you're building modules, and I want to talk with you about that in a second. For me, the thing I love most is Terraform console. Just pop in there, put the resource address in there, and see what keys I have available. Maybe try a few things out without going through a plan and apply phase, or apply, assume yes, auto approve. Yeah, there's definitely a couple of good ways. So when you're building these modules, what's your way of debugging? Because I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of plan, apply, whoops, plan, format, apply.
Omar gets it right on the first try. I don't know what this person's insinuating, but I'm insulted personally.
That's a great question. And there is a lot of debugging. There's a lot of things where whether it's a subnet that wasn't found or some resource that's not, doesn't have the right value with it. There's a lot of debugging involved, and the Terraform output is great for that. So I read a lot of Terraform output, and I feel like with experience, it gets easier to read the Terraform output and find out what exactly you did wrong. But I think that's just it's an everyday thing. You're testing, applying, destroying, running into something because you want to add a new feature. The docs are great. The output is great. And typically it's just reading through the docs and the output to figure out what went wrong. And it gets easier with time. It can be definitely frustrating in the beginning because sometimes it's just, you don't exactly know why it's breaking, and then you change the one thing that you thought was going to fix it, but then 3 other things go bad. And definitely, I mean, that happens a lot. And I've just learned to get comfortable with that. It's just a part of building. And it gets easier with time and experience with your particular cloud. So
the nice thing is once you've codified everything and the last iteration worked, the next one will also work.
absolutely.
There's some nice benefits to that.
The more that there was a time when Terraform errors were like really confusing a lot of the time, and I think that time is in the past now, which is amazing. I rarely find myself confused about where something happened or like which module I invoked with like the wrong arguments. So like a lot of that workflows I think has gotten incredibly good over the last few years. And a surprising percentage of the time now, and it was a much lower percentage 5 years ago, it's actually like, oh, this is like a cloud provider or API issue where like it didn't delete something right, or something's kind of frozen and it won't delete like a target group on a load balancer, and it can't delete the load balancer or any of the other, it's like, it's that type of just complicated cloud thing that ends up being a problem for me now. So that type of debugging is just like, being, I don't know, turning on debug logs and looking at some API calls in there if I need to in Terraform, and then filing support tickets with Amazon as needed.
Requesting extra instances to be added or something being removed that even the API won't remove for you. Yeah, we've all been there. It's part of the fun of this job, I think. And it's a good call out. The debug logs are not something that, I think in the past 1.5 years, you would have even needed as much, unless maybe you were updating to a beta version or release candidate in your production environment, despite the clear warning to not do that. It happens, right? Like, we're all excited. I mean, we released Terraform 1.0 just a little under a month ago. At that point, we were at 1,050 providers. We're at nearly 1,200 now. It's like Dave says, there's a provider for everything, and it's joyful. There's so much that you can now codify that you couldn't 2 years ago, and definitely not 5 years ago. We joke about the Domino's provider a lot, which, a very important part of everyone's infrastructure and food pyramid. But I'm curious, what is your favorite provider and why? I'll let Omar go first.
Oh, my favorite provider. I work mostly with, I've done a lot of work with AWS. So that's the provider that I'm most comfortable with, as far as just being familiar with resources and being able to get things up and running. But when it comes to like favorite, there's some providers that I've actually like written on my own that I think are fun. So there's the ones that I've used for work and that I just use because that's what we're working on. And, I like them, like the AWS provider. So that's, so if I had to go from professionally, like what's professionally my favorite provider, what I've used the most and what I'm most accustomed to, it'd be AWS provider. Some of the providers that I've used that I really like though, just on a, to have fun with, are like some that I've written on my own for like, just like, hello providers, a Twitter provider, things like that. And I bring that up because I've just had fun with writing Terraform providers on a personal level. So those two things came up when you asked me. Like there's the AWS provider, which I use a lot just professionally, and then there's like the smaller providers that you can just have fun with. So hopefully that was a clear enough answer.
Absolutely. I think tweeting from Terraform is nice. There's some benefit to that.
Somewhere between nice and possibly a war crime if you do it seriously. But I love that exists. It's so cool, Omar. I hate to be lame, but I'm going to say the AWS provider as well for a slightly different reason. Yes, I've used it over the years a ton, but the reason I love it is because it literally exists and prevents me from having to program against Amazon's API. I think for anyone who has like for anyone who's programmed against Amazon's API, the complexity that this thing abstracts away from you has to dawn on you. Like if you've ever done something really simple like list instances and you realized you had to make additional API calls to like page through result pages on an API, or like just the various horrific stuff you have to do when you're interacting with Amazon's API and all the abstractions that they about their implementation that leak through that. And nothing against Amazon, by the way. Love you, Amazon. At that point, you realize like all the pain this thing is saving you from and all the complexity that's in the provider and not in your code base, in your infra code base, or in your application code base. Like you get to just deal with your domain. Terraform, like I sound like a really cheesy Terraform salesman now. I'm sorry, but I really mean this. It's like if you look at the source code for that provider sometime, if you want to look into like the abyss, because it's there and it's keeping that away from you. So that's why I love the Amazon provider by Dave Cohen.
That was a very nice explanation. I think many of us enjoy Terraform for this very reason, that you have to use the API, right? There is no way you can still go through the visual interface and click things together and call that realistic infrastructure. I mean, not even for your test instance should you be doing something like that, because you're gonna miss something like a firewall rule, or cleaning up EBS volumes afterwards. And I think the comment you made with the API specs constantly changing, it makes sense. Amazon has what, like 600-ish services right now, if I'm not super off. Azure, Google Cloud, the same. There's going to be stuff that's not going to work, and it's not my job to make that work. I'm happy there's other people that make that work, abstract that away, and make it a good experience for me. It's I think we all feel the same way. In the meantime, we've got a couple new people joining us in chat. Tracy wasn't really sure, Omar, this one is for you, if the Twitter provider could qualify as fun. That might be because there is no fun category in the Terraform registry. But there's definitely, I guess we all have different types of hobbies.
Can I just say, I hereby move to add a fun category, because like that's a real programming thing. Like people learn programming by doing fun things like that, and like that's how you just learn whatever you're working on. And I think we should have like a stupid, intentionally fun / stupid Terraform provider category. Just saying.
I think we've got office hours with the registry team coming up pretty soon. I'll definitely put 3 votes in for educational categories on the registry, because there's something magical to sending your tweet from Terraform, ordering a pizza, pineapple or not. Yeah, it's been a contested topic on this Terraform Thursday. It definitely works. Lucky, happy you're joining us today. It's always so nice. I know you've been here on this stream, and some of our audience have been. It's nice when we get our repeat visitors. They usually have really good questions, which is the most transparent ploy at soliciting more questions while we talk about other stuff. So you're working on the Vault module. And I'm curious, what comes next?
After Vault, I don't know the exact roadmap, but we have a few other products that we'd like to do the same thing with. So after Vault, possibly, console, and beyond that, doing the same type of work and creating the same type of experience with products other than just Vault. So it's our mission to kind of make sure that we're spanning all of our company's products and providing the same type of experience, giving you that same consistency in building out those products.
I like that. We're being very mysterious here. I guess that just means that we'll all have to get back together here. In the meantime, I can confirm that the registry team did hear our plea. No commitment has been made to adding a category for educational providers, like the ones we talked about. So yeah, there's, yeah, let's call it things in motion. I think that's the correct way of approaching this. So I'm curious, when you're building the module, what's the one thing that you've now learned that at the beginning you were thinking completely differently about? Is there a specific resource you came across or workflow where you thought, hey, I can just do A, B, C, and it ends up actually being A, C, D, B? We're making this really hard for the live translation. If you're following that, I'm sorry. We're not using very simple words and we're not making it easy.
I think some of the things that I've learned outside of like specific syntax in Terraform constructs that you just get better with, the bigger thing that I've learned here is structuring the module, making the submodule structure make sense, structuring things in a way where the module itself is sort of a installation module, but then setting it up in a way where if the user wants to provide their own VPC, it's just as easy as if they want to just create the VPC as well. So that has been sort of an art in trying to figure out how do you structure a module and provide the flexibility so that the user can bring their own piece with them if they like, but they can easily just create it at that time as well. So that's like a bigger structural sort of organization thing that I feel I've learned and that the team has learned doing this. Getting to smaller nitty-gritty type details, I feel like there's been a few Terraform constructs and syntax things that I've just become more familiar with because I found that it made the job easier to do it that way. But those are like really specific things. So I wanted to just kind of touch on both, especially the broader organizational thing that I learned.
These are super good callouts. I think many module developers struggle with that very thing of you want to have a module that's easy to use, has same defaults, but at the same time, I can just throw it into a new AWS account where VPC is already set up, where IAM is already set up, and all I want to provide is the ARN4 resource and still have it work.
Absolutely.
That is a very nice art. Dave, on your side, let's talk about what was educational so far about this process. Mapping reference architecture to real infrastructure.
Sorry, say it again.
So from mapping reference architecture, which generally is documentation, to real infrastructure and cloud resources.
I mean, yeah, like I said, until 3-4 weeks ago, I was in practical land on the Terraform Cloud SRE team. So for me, it's really just been a process of getting up to speed with all of this kind of simultaneously, even though obviously like a reference architecture happened and then module implementation started based on that. So for me, it's kind of been the fire hose approach. It's been interesting to see, actually, it's been really gratifying to see that regardless of people's background on the team, I think our instincts for what a good, clear module structure is, or like, our instincts for what the end user experience has to be is very similar, and for how to get there specifically. Like Omar's experience on the education team and using the tools, my practical experience, and it's the same goes for the rest of the team. It's like everyone's got a little bit different experience, but it all comes together. It's almost crazy to think, like, when we say, like, what should a great module structure be, and someone writes a document, it's like it's filled with comments that are like, I completely agree with this. Oh yes, like, good idea. Also, thanks for calling this. It's just like I think it gives me hope that these opinionated recommendations that it's our job to make are actually going to kind of vibe with the rest of the Terraform community. Like, it's going to sync up with a lot of what's already out there that is popular, easy to use, easy to read, easy to fork and work on. And on a more practical level, I mean, one of the big things that I've learned, it's been probably 3 years now that I haven't worked with any of the other clouds other than Amazon. And it's just nice to kind of jump back in and see that there is a way to write modular and flexible, like we were talking about, and yet very, very similarly structured modules across different cloud providers, where if you look at one, and I'm like just getting caught up on GCP again, it's been 3 years since I ran anything on it, that I can immediately see that the structure is essentially the same, know where the complexity is if I need to change something that's on an instance, like I know where to look for that user data script or whatever. And it gives me hope that as we, like we were saying vaguely, as we do this for more products, as more of these enterprise and open source modules get published, that there's going to be a really sane structure to all of them, and they're going to be easy to work with, whether you use them the way they are or modify them immediately. And that adding features or bringing products together, or whatever we decide to do in the future, I don't know, this is not like a roadmap thing, but that they'll be easy for our relatively small team to maintain and improve over time because of that structure that we all agree on. That was a really long answer. I hope that's helpful.
I also just want
very helpful.
I also just want to give a shout out to Dave and the architecture pod, because I know they've been doing a lot of work on the going over the reference architecture, deployment guides, changes that may not have been published yet, but I know they're doing a lot of work in clarifying that. And that's an important thing, because we talked about other cloud providers earlier, and I want to emphasize that the modules like that we're writing here on the implementation side, they're sort of like a prepackaged kind of ready-made implementation of what's in the deployment guide and reference architecture, but it's just as important to have that reference architecture and deployment guide to go back to. So clarifying those, adding information to those, making it easy for the user to read, that's a big thing. And Dave's team, I know, is focused on that. And I'm looking forward to a lot of that as well.
I think the thing I'm hearing here is, first of all, very supportive team, which is nice. That is how it should be, and usually that results in better product. So, I'm happy for you, because that means we all get to benefit from that. And I think, Dave, you said something, I don't remember the exact words, but the summary pretty much is that none of us are as smart as all of us together, because you haven't been doing a specific cloud for 3 years. So you might not know this one specific really cool BuzzFeedy hack that now everyone is using, but somebody else might. And as a result, we're getting a better product. Is it opinionated? Of course. I think no engineering is ever not opinionated. Doesn't matter if we're talking civil architecture or Terraform modules, there's always the spirit of the team that built it very clearly in there. And it's a hallmark, I think. It's oftentimes considered, oftentimes people are like, oh, this is way too opinionated. But the thing is, when you're talking reference architecture, this is the opinion of 1,000 people, of maybe tens of thousands of people that, have been using Vault for years. And this is just the summary of that knowledge. And to me, that's a good opinion to be able to build upon.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind that it's an opinionated approach. It's what we recommend, So take it as that, because at the end of the day, you do know your environment better than we know it. So with enough experience and knowledge, if you've decided that there's something specific to your environment where the reference architecture doesn't apply, then by no means are you constrained by the reference architecture. It's just our way to help you easily ramp up and use the product, but it's never a constraint. So you're always free at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, you do know your environment better. So it's meant to help you, but it's not meant to constrain you either. So
For what it's worth, HashiCorp is like the least dogmatic company ever. So like to a fault, which is why our team exists. You know, it's like we built a bunch of Legos and we're like, hey, these are really cool, like amazing implementations of these ideas. Try them out. Oh yeah, like it's up to you to glue them together yourself. And we're sort of out of early adopters who are fine spending 6 months gluing things together. And like that's why we're improving all of this, all of these on-ramping things and like giving you ready-made stuff to try and to use. Um, but yeah, it's like we're still that flexible company that wants to let you do however you need to do for your environment. But it's like for us, I think even having a strong opinion like lightly held feels like we're like I've talked to Omar about this. You know, it's like we don't want to come on too strong. We don't want to like corner people or not leave them an option to do something. But I think even what feels like really constraining to us, or like, are we telling people like to too harshly to do this one thing or recommending this too exclusively? For other companies, that's just like that's completely normal. That's like you have to tell the user what to do because they're looking to you to figure out what to do. So yeah, we're still the fun-loving hippies that you know and love. I promise.
It's very hard to stay serious when you put it that nicely. I agree. It's a lot of times when we do community office hours, people ask questions like, "Hey, how do I get this done involved? How do I do this with Terraform?" And 100% of the times, the answer "it depends" will fit. Oftentimes we have an idea, but that's still based on our opinion, on our background, and it might be something that you learned while building against an on-prem data center, which might not scale at all to your public cloud offering that you now have to build this for. We're constantly learning, relearning, and hopefully forgetting the stuff that, didn't bring us joy, all in the result of building better modules and, happier infrastructure. I'm game for that. I'm here for that.
I'm
So
all about happy infrastructure.
I think we all are. So I'm curious. When the module gets released, what is the flow for me as a user going to be? Am I going to find it on the registry? Are you coming back for an office hours to give us a live demo? I take that as a yes. Awesome.
A live demo is always possible, but the workflow here for the user would just be to go to the registry. And we're putting a lot of thought and care into the documentation so that you can easily use the module. But yeah, going to the registry and using the registry to spin up any prerequisite things that if you need to, because the module is a Vault installation module, it assumes certain prerequisites like a VPC. So if you have it, great. If you don't have it, the module also has example code that lets you do that. So at no point are you going to have to walk away from the module and be like, oh, well, I guess I have to go build that now before I can come use it. Everything is supplied to you in the module if you don't already have it, as far as prerequisites go. So that'll be the workflow. Hopefully, come to the module, come to the registry, use the module, use it to spin up any prerequisites, and just get going quickly.
So I think batteries included approach.
Yeah, definitely batteries included.
I like that. I mean, I know experience is in your name, but yes, that is the best approach when the module actually does solve the problem you had when you downloaded it in the first place. Yeah, that sounds like we're gonna have a lot of fun in the future looking at these modules and definitely talking about it. One point that Dave made earlier about finding common patterns, I wanted to touch upon again. I think let's take Vault as an example. The MTLS implementation of that is very likely going to depend on a lot of stuff that you can just copy over from one module to, sorry, from one cloud to another. Am I right in seeing it this way, or am I totally off?
I think you're not totally off. There is similarity into the workflow. It's just there's different components of different clouds. So with like, let's say the TLS certs, you want to apply them to a load balancer in AWS. It's a little different because you're putting, the certs into ACM. In GCP, it might be a different way, or there might be a different place you have to put that cert to actually use it with the load balancer. Same thing applies with Azure, but the process is the same, right? Generate the certs, put them in the respective cloud providers where you're supposed to be putting sensitive information for the nodes and the load balancers, and then have the load balancer and nodes that you spin up pull from that. So the workflow is the same, but with clouds, I've seen different clouds. It can get a little, what you expect from one cloud might be a little different as what the other cloud expects, but the workflow still, I think, remains the same.
Got it.
And the beautiful thing is the example code provided in the modules, again, takes care of that part for you. So you don't have to worry too much about what a cloud provider expects as far as where you're supposed to put the certs and things like that.
And even for those of you who do end up cracking these open, the shape, like Omar's saying, like the pattern is the same everywhere that it's possible. I mean, we're leaving ourselves an out in case something comes up in the future where we have to, like, a cloud just doesn't allow for a pattern that we're using. But it's what's good for you is good for us too, because we have to maintain these. And if every one of them is structured completely different, it's just a nightmare to like add one feature or fix a bug or add a tweak. So they're going to be the goal is to kind of for everyone to kind of open these up. If you do open them up, you'll see kind of what you expect and what intuitively makes sense. The first time I looked at one of these modules, it worked exactly how I hoped it would, how I thought a module like this would, just based on this description. So if you've been working with Terraform for a while, I think these are going to be real easy to use.
I like really easy to use. So one question that we get a lot when we talk about Terraform modules is, I've got Cloud 1 here, Cloud 2 here, and in the background, I'm using the random provider or maybe the TLS provider or something else that's not cloud specific. And I have to have that for both clouds. How do you implement that? Do you use a shared module, something along those lines?
Yeah, so we aren't at a point right now where we've developed a share module, although that might be in the works for some of the things like you mentioned with TLS. I think that's the right way to go when it comes to certain things. And I'm going to bring up TLS again because that's something that you have to handle for all three cloud providers. But yeah, to keep it short, I think that's the way to go. We haven't got to a point where we've developed some sort of shared provider, but I think we will do that as the need arises for things like, let's say TLS or any other component.
Shared provider, shared modules, I think all very valid approaches. Shared provider is actually, if you end up choosing that route, we're definitely going to be talking about that, because I was more aiming towards how does your team deal with shared code in terms of modules?
Oh, I'm sorry. And I'd like to correct myself. I was saying shared provider, but I did mean to say shared modules. So
got it.
Sorry about that.
I mean, depending on your use case, you might need a different provider. And maybe that's okay. We've had a couple of cases where people forked upstream providers to add their own methods to them because we couldn't support them, or they added something in between that wasn't standard for us. So definitely possible. So we've got a couple more minutes left. If you want to get your questions in, now is the right time, or otherwise you'll have to wait till, I'm going to say the third week of August. At which point we can also probably play with the module. But I think, Dave, you made a really good shout out before as well. You both have. If you want to learn about how to use HashiCorp products, head on over to learn.hashicorp.com. Lots and lots of tutorials that don't just show you the first step, but the first few steps. You're not going to find a guide there that will be perfect for your infrastructure that teaches you how to run Vault across 3 clouds in 6 geos, because that's very specific. But you'll definitely find the building blocks there. You know, we're teaching you how to fish, and I think that is definitely a good one. On a personal call out, well, personal and professional call out, I need to point those that are interested in building providers or building for HashiCorp products to a HashiTalks edition that we're organizing on July 22nd called HashiTalks Build. If you are providing Terraform providers, or, you know, as people would call it, developing them, then this is definitely the type of event for you. If you want to learn how to build Terraform providers, also the event for you. Head on over to hashi.co/build. We'll have a link for that up in the chat as well. We have a ton of different content. So yes, this is Terraform Thursday, which is obviously my favorite type of Thursday. But we'll also have sessions on console, boundary, Vault, Waypoint, Vagrant, community management, and the things that you don't necessarily type into your IDE, like how to be a kind person when you have an open source project and somebody comes in who's not kind, or not as kind as they could be. So there's a lot of interesting sessions. Omar, Dave, any things that you want to share as final words?
I just want to say that it's been fun, and I've enjoyed talking with you about these things. And I had a blast discussing this stuff.
I think that's very mutual. Thank you for joining me, and Dave.
It's been a blast. Thanks for refereeing, and thanks everyone for contributing your questions. And yeah, you know, we're all a bunch of engineers trying to make good stuff. So it's an exciting place to be.
That it definitely is. Dave, specific question for you. If I want to learn about Linux and things around that, would you know a place where I could go?
I would. I don't have the book next to me, but I recommend the Unix and Linux System Administrator's Handbook. There's also YouTube channels you can go to.
I see how this worked out. Okay, we'll have the channel link up in the chat. That's not a problem. Easier to click for people anyway. Thank you both for joining us, and well, we'll see you at a different Terraform Thursday in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks. See ya.